Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something really fascinating, maybe a bit uncomfortable too. How kids actually learn, or sometimes unlearn, prejudice.
Yeah, it's crucial stuff if you're interested in social development, education,
Yeah,
really, how society works.
absolutely. And we're digging into some solid research here, looking at how prejudice develops across different groups, race, gender, sexuality, the whole picture.
Right, the sources we're using synthesize, gosh, decades of work,
Yeah.
mapping out the patterns, the processes.
And trying to figure out how to reduce it, which is key.
Exactly. And the core idea, maybe the headline, is that prejudice isn't always directly taught. It often emerges as a sort of side effect of normal thinking.
Like how kids' brains develop.
Precisely, how their cognitive growth interacts with the social world they're in. Kids naturally categorize things, simplify the world.
Makes sense.
But when society puts value judgments on those categories,
Mm.
well, that's where prejudice can start. And maybe the most surprising finding right off the bat is about age.
Okay, let's jump into that. The age curve for racial prejudice. So if we look at kids from the majority group, you might think, okay, prejudice is learned. It just goes up steadily over time, right?
That's the intuitive assumption, yeah.
Yeah.
But the research actually shows something quite different. It's not linear at all.
Oh, how does it work then?
Well, for very young kids, prejudice levels are actually quite low. But then they tend to increase pretty sharply.
Increase. When does that peak happen?
It generally peaks around ages 5 to 7. This is, a prime time for kids figuring out social categories.
Okay, 5 to 7. But then what? Does it stay high?
Here's the twist. After that peak, around age 7 or so, the curve generally starts to decrease again.
It goes down. Okay, wait, that drop off. That sounds really important. What makes it go down? Or maybe does it always go down?
That's the critical factor. It really seems to hinge on intergroup contact.
Contact with kids from other groups.
Exactly. Meaningful contact. For majority group kids who have lots of opportunities for that kind of positive contact, yeah, the prejudice tends to decrease after age 7.
But if they don't have that contact, if they're in a very homogenous environment.
Then the research suggests those prejudiced attitudes often don't decrease. In fact, they can continue to increase with age.
Wow, okay. So contact is huge. But that drop off, even for the high contact kids,
Yeah.
how do we know what's really going on?
That's the million-dollar question, really. There are two main possibilities researchers grapple with.
Okay.
One is that kids, maybe around 8 to 10, they just get better at,
Well,
controlling themselves. They learn the social rules.
they figure out it's not okay to say prejudice things out loud.
Right. They internalize the social norm against expressing prejudice. So they might still feel it, but they learn to suppress it. It's social compliance.
Or what's the other possibility?
The other possibility is that the contact itself is genuinely changing their minds. That the exposure, the positive experiences actually reduce the internal prejudice.
So learning manners versus actually changing hearts and minds.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And figuring out which one is happening or the balance between them is, well, it's key for figuring out what interventions actually work long term.
Okay, now let's flip this. What about kids from minority groups? Is the pattern the same?
No, it's actually almost the inverse, which is really telling.
Inverse how?
Minority kids often start out with somewhat positive or at least neutral attitudes towards the majority group when they're really little, like ages 2 to 4.
Okay.
But over time, their attitudes toward the majority group tend to become more negative or more prejudiced.
So their prejudice levels increase as they get older.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
And here's another crucial difference. For minority children, the amount of intergroup contact they have doesn't seem to be related to these attitudes in the same way.
That is different. Why? Why does their prejudice tend to increase?
It seems to be a response to their reality. As they get older, especially once they start school, they begin to experience discrimination or notice it more.
They become more aware of racism, inequality.
Exactly. They gain a clearer understanding of systemic issues, societal biases. And sometimes, unfortunately, they experience prejudice directly.
And this is where parents come in, right? For minority families, there's this thing called racial ethnic socialization.
Yes, it's incredibly important. Parents actively prepare their children for the racial realities they'll face. It takes several forms.
Like what?
Well, there's cultural socialization, teaching kids about their heritage, history, instilling cultural pride. That's
what builds resilience.
Definitely. Then there's preparation for bias. This is where parents explicitly talk about discrimination, explain that it exists, and maybe give advice on how to cope with it.
Okay, proactive preparation.
And the fourth one often mentioned is egalitarianism, emphasizing that people should be treated as individuals, focusing on character over group membership.
Right, but the source material also listed a third one that, it sounds pretty stark. Promotion of mistrust.
It does sound stark, and it reflects a harsh reality for some families. It involves teaching children to be cautious, maybe wary, when interacting with members of the majority group.
That seems intense. Why would parents do that?
Researchers suggest it's often a protective strategy, not about fostering hostility, but about safety, physical and psychological. In environments where bias is high risk, this caution can be seen as necessary protection.
Wow. That really highlights the different worlds kids can be navigating. And this contrasts sharply with how majority group parents often handle race, right?
Very much so. For white parents, their own attitudes heavily influence if and how they talk about race.
How so?
Well, parents who hold more biased views tend to avoid talking about race much at all, or they might emphasize group differences. Sometimes they might subtly, or not so subtly, discourage contact with kids from other groups.
Kind of reinforcing the separation.
Exactly. Whereas white parents who are more concerned about equality, they're more likely to actually discuss race and racism with their kids, often using what's called a race-conscious approach.
Not the colorblind approach.
Less often the colorblind approach, according to some of this research. More acknowledging differences and talking about fairness directly.
Okay, let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier, this idea that prejudice develops from our basic cognitive need to categorize. There's a theory about this.
Yes, Developmental Intergroup Theory. It basically says prejudice isn't some separate evil thing that gets implanted. It's more like a byproduct of a normal, even necessary mental process.
The process of sorting the world out.
Exactly. Think about it. A child's brain is bombarded with information. To cope, it creates categories. People, objects, everything. It simplifies things, makes the world predictable.
Frees up mental energy.
Right. Grouping people based on visible cues, age, gender, race, it's just part of that optimization process. The problem arises when the social environment attaches value, status, or stereotypes to those categories.
So the brain provides the box, society tells the kid what to think about the box.
That's a good way to put it. And researchers have clever ways to see which boxes babies even notice, like the habituation paradigm.
Oh yeah, where they show babies pictures until they get bored.
They measure looking time. If a baby looks longer at a new picture after seeing similar ones, it means they recognize it as different. It belongs to a different category in their mind.
And what do they find? Which categories matter to infants?
The really striking finding is that infants seem to pick up on gender and age as meaningful categories quite early.
But not race.
But race, according to these studies, doesn't seem to be a salient category for infants in the same way. They don't naturally differentiate faces based on race initially.
So the ability to categorize is there, it's innate.
Yes, the cognitive machinery is there.
But the relevance of race as a primary social category, that's learned from the environment.
It appears so. It's not biologically hardwired in the way maybe gender perception is. Society teaches us that race matters.
And once kids learn these categories matter, they start valuing them differently. This makes me think of those really famous historical studies, the doll studies.
Ah, yes. Kenneth and Mamie Clark's work. Absolutely groundbreaking and, frankly, heartbreaking.
What did they find exactly?
They presented young children, both black and white, with dolls that were identical except for skin color. And they asked questions like, show me the doll that looks nice, show me the doll that looks bad, show me the doll that is a nice color.
And the results were?
Overwhelmingly, children preferred the white doll. Around 60% chose the white doll in response to the positive question saying it looks best, or it's the good color.
Even the black children.
Yes, that was the devastating part. Many black children also preferred the white doll and assigned the negative attributes to the black doll, the one that looked like them. Some kids apparently got quite upset when asked to identify the doll that looked like them, associating it with being bad.
Wow, it just showed how early societal prejudice gets internalized, affecting self-worth.
Profoundly. It demonstrated the psychological weight of segregation and systemic racism on the youngest minds. A powerful argument used in Brown v. Board of Education, actually.
Right. Okay, so that's the internal side. What about behavior? How does this categorization play out in how kids interact, say, in school?
Well, you definitely see preferences emerge. In elementary school, kids tend to prefer playing with peers of the same race, especially in more social, less structured settings like the playground.
Less so in class?
A bit less so in the classroom, where activities might be more structured by the teacher. And there's a gender difference, too. Girls tend to show a stronger same-race preference than boys in these studies.
Interesting. And what about minority kids' friendships?
Black children, particularly in schools where they are the minority, are often more likely than white children to report having friends of a different race.
Which might just be about opportunity, right? Fewer same-race peers available.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
often a reflection of the school's demographics. They bridge those gaps more frequently, partly out of necessity.
Okay, let's shift gears to another major category. Gender. You said infants pick up on this early.
Incredibly early.
Yeah.
Gender stereotypes start forming in toddlers, even before they have the words boy or girl down pat. They associate certain toys or activities with males or females very young.
And that evolves.
It does. By around age 9, the basis shifts a bit. They start associating roles more with perceived interests or activities rather than just the label boy or girl.
Is this universal? Does gender preference show up everywhere at the same time?
Not necessarily. Culture plays a big role. In most Western societies, you see strong gender-based preferences. Kids preferring same-gender playmates emerge by age 3.
But elsewhere?
But in cultures where mixed gender play and interaction are more common from a young age, like studies in rural Kenya showed, that strong same-gender preference might not show up until they're older, like 6 to 9.
Fascinating. So the social structure shapes it. Now here's something that stood out in the notes. Later on, around 9 or 10, kids start valuing masculine traits more.
Yes, this is a consistent finding. Children learn to value characteristics typically stereotyped as masculine, like being strong, assertive, dominant, more highly than characteristics stereotyped as feminine.
And they apply this to both boys and girls.
They do. They evaluate both boys and girls more positively if they display these masculine traits. It shows they're absorbing broader societal biases about which traits are considered more important or desirable.
Okay, one more area. Prejudice based on sexual orientation or gender identity. What does the research say about how that develops?
With anti-gay or anti-trans prejudice, the age pattern looks a bit different. Generally, older adolescents and young adults tend to be more tolerant than younger adolescents. Tolerance seems to increase with age through the teenage years.
But it's not straightforward tolerance, is it? The context matters.
Hugely. Comfort levels are very situation dependent. People might report very low discomfort in low intimacy scenarios like working on a committee with a gay person, but discomfort levels can jump way up in high intimacy situations. The classic example being sharing a dorm room or using the same locker room.
And are there gender differences here too?
Yes. The research often finds boys express more negative attitudes toward gay men specifically. That gender difference isn't usually seen when asking about attitudes toward lesbians.
Interesting. And what about attitudes towards transgender people?
The findings there often center on gender nonconformity. Studies found children express dislike toward peers, described as gender nonconforming. They liked peers who fit traditional gender roles better.
And this applied whether the child was described as transgender or cisgender.
Yes, in some key studies. The negative reaction seemed triggered more by the breaking of gender norms than the label transgender itself, suggesting it's tied into those deeply ingrained gender stereotypes we were just talking about.
Okay, we've got the patterns, the cognitive roots. Let's talk more about how these attitudes get transmitted. We touched on parents. Is it mainly them teaching kids these biases directly?
You might think so, but the research suggests direct teaching of prejudice is actually not the most common way it happens.
Really? So it's more subtle.
Much more subtle, usually. Parents have a huge influence, but it's often indirect. Through modeling kids, imitating their parents' behavior, overhearing comments.
Just picking things up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also by how parents structure the child's environment. Who do they socialize with? What neighborhoods do they live in? What media are they exposed to? Those choices shape the child's experiences and input.
So controlling the contact and the media diet, essentially.
Right. Explicit lessons in bigotry seem relatively rare compared to these more indirect pathways.
What about friends? Peer pressure. Is that a big driver of prejudice?
It's a bit mixed. Generally, studies find surprisingly little correlation between an individual child's prejudice levels and the average attitude of their general peer group.
Oh, that is surprising.
Yeah, unless the attitudes are about groups that are very highly stigmatized in that particular social context, then peer norms might matter more.
But there was one finding about peers that sounded really powerful. Something about rejection.
Ah, yes, that's a potent one. Children who experience social rejection from a peer group tend to express significantly more prejudice afterwards than kids who are accepted.
Okay, that makes some sense, maybe lashing out.
But here's the really striking part. That increased level of prejudice often persists, even if the child later finds a new peer group where they are accepted.
Wow, so the sting of that rejection has a lasting impact on their attitudes towards others, like a defensive mechanism kicking in.
It really seems that way. It suggests how vulnerable kids' self-concept can be and how social pain can get redirected outwards as prejudice. It's a powerful finding.
It really is. And it links back to media too, right? The input kids get.
Definitely. Media exposure matters. Studies consistently link greater amounts of TV viewing with higher levels of both gender and racial prejudice in children.
Because of stereotypes in the content.
Largely, yes, because portrayals of women and minority groups are often narrow, stereotyped, or just plain inaccurate. Kids absorb those messages.
Okay, so lots of influences. Let's shift to solutions. We know contact works for majority kids. That seems like the biggest lever.
It's certainly one of the most robust findings, yes. Positive intergroup contact, reducing prejudice in majority group children. And this isn't just a U.S. finding. It holds up across cultures, Canada, China, Serbia, lots of places.
But you emphasized positive contact. It's not just about putting kids in the same building, is it?
Absolutely not. This is where Thomas Pettigrew's distinction is so important. He talked about desegregation versus integration.
It's the difference.
Desegregation just means groups are no longer formally separated by law or policy. You put them in the same school building. That's it.
Okay.
Genuine integration, though, that's about creating conditions for positive, meaningful contact within that setting. Contact designed to actually break down barriers.
And what are those conditions? What does positive contact require?
There are 4 classic conditions, often called all-ports contact hypothesis conditions. First, the groups need to have equal status within the situation, like in the school.
No obvious power imbalance.
Right. Second, they need to work towards common goals, something they have to achieve together.
Cooperation.
Third, they need opportunities to actually get to know each other as individuals, break down those group stereotypes, acquaintance potential.
Personalized interaction.
And fourth, there needs to be clear support from authorities like teachers, principals backing the effort and setting norms of respect.
Equal status, common goals, getting to know each other, and authority support. But you said these are often hard to meet?
Very often, yes. Think about a typical desegregated school. Do students from different groups really have equal status if they're tracked into different academic streams?
Good point. Like advanced versus remedial classes, often breaking down along racial or socioeconomic lines?
Exactly. That reinforces status differences. It doesn't equalize them. Do they always have common goals? Or are they competing? Can they really get to know each other if the school structure keeps them apart? These conditions are often violated, sometimes unintentionally.
Which means just desegregating might not reduce prejudice and could even make it worse if it confirms stereotypes.
Precisely. That's why the structure of the interaction is everything. Which brings us to things like the jigsaw classroom.
Ah, the jigsaw method. Explain how that works. It tries to build in these conditions.
It does, quite elegantly.
Yeah.
Elliot Aronson developed it. You divide students into small, diverse teams, maybe 6 kids per team. A lesson is broken into, say, 6 parts.
Okay.
Each student on the team becomes the expert on just one part. They have to learn their section and then teach it to the rest of their team.
Ah, so they depend on each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No one can succeed unless everyone shares their piece of the puzzle. It creates interdependence, a common goal. Everyone is an expert, which helps equalize status. And they have to interact closely to teach and learn.
Meeting those conditions. And does it work?
The research is pretty positive. It significantly reduces prejudice towards the specific outgroup members who are on your team.
Towards your teammates.
Yes. And it often leads to kids forming real cross-ethnic friendships. The main caveat is whether those positive feelings always generalize to the entire outgroup beyond just the teammates. Sometimes yes, sometimes less so.
Still pretty powerful. What about other educational approaches, like multicultural curricula?
Right. There are broader educational interventions, too. You have multicultural education, which focuses on teaching accurate information about different groups' history and culture, aiming for respect and harmony.
Integrating diverse perspectives into standard curriculum.
Yes. And then there's anti-bias education, which often takes a more direct approach, focusing on institutional racism, power dynamics, and teaching skills to identify and challenge bias.
How effective are these classroom-based approaches overall?
The overall effect size reported in meta-analyses is often small to moderate. It's not a magic bullet. But there's a pattern in what works best.
Which is?
The programs that seem most effective are those that include direct contact between groups as part of the program, and those that focus specifically on building empathy and perspective-taking skill.
Yeah.
Getting kids to walk in someone else's shoes?
Exactly. The least effective approaches. Things that just involve reading materials about other groups without that interaction or emotional engagement component.
So, again, it comes back to structured, meaningful human interaction. That seems to be the common thread.
It really does. And the long-term payoff for getting this right, for creating genuinely integrated schools, seems huge based on long-term studies.
What kind of payoff?
Well, follow-up studies of adults who attended desegregated schools back in the day show real differences. Black students from those schools were more likely later in life to live in integrated neighborhoods, have more white friends, and work in integrated settings that often paid better.
And for white students.
For white students from those same schools, they were also more likely as adults to have diverse friends, even diverse romantic partners, and to live and work in more diverse environments.
So the benefits ripple out across their whole lives. It suggests these early experiences can really shape lifelong social patterns and opportunities. It underscores that prejudice isn't some fixed trait. It's learned, influenced by our cognitive habits, yes, but profoundly shaped by our social environment, our parents, our experiences.
And interventions can work, especially when they focus on that positive, structured contact.
Absolutely, when they're designed to break down those artificial categories by fostering real human connection and interdependence.
Okay, so bringing this all together. We started by talking about that tricky period, maybe ages 8 to 10, when majority group kids often learn the social rules they learn to control expressing prejudice. But we questioned whether that control means genuine internal change or just social performance.
Right, the compliance versus conversion question.
So here's the thought to leave you, our listener, with. If we know kids learn this control, what strategies in schools, in families, in communities do you think are most likely to push past mere compliance? How do we help ensure that learning to control the expression of prejudice actually translates into a deep, lasting reduction in the prejudice itself, carrying into adulthood?